Alright, as promised, here is a video on completing the square. First example one, we want to talk about quadratic equation solutions. So specifically, I want you guys to consider this real quick. Let's say we have the equation x squared equals 16. So if we're trying to solve for x here, we know we're going to square root both sides. Square root, because that cancels out the squared. So now we have that x equals the square root of 16, which we know is 4, but it's also negative 4. Because remember, negative 4 times negative 4 will give you a positive 16. So we want to make sure when we're squaring these things that we consider both the positive and the negative side of these. Now, likewise, let's say we have something pretty similar. Let's say we've got x minus 3, quantity squared, equals 16. This should be a review. To solve this, we want, again, square root both sides. Square root, so that cancels out the square root sign and the squared. So on the left side, we have x minus 3. And on the right side, we have plus or minus 4, which now we have two equations that we're going to solve. We have that x minus 3 equals 4. Add 3 both sides, x equals 7. Or we have that x minus 3 equals negative 4. So add 3 to both sides, x equals negative 1. Both solutions would work in this case. Alright, example 2 gets into why we do the method of completing the square, which we really didn't talk about this in class, but it's actually kind of really neat to look at. If you look at example 2 in your textbook on page 232, it actually goes over it really well. So take a look at this example here. We've got x squared minus 6x minus 8 equals 0. So try to factor that. What is something that multiplies together to give you negative 8, but adds to give you negative 6? Can you think of anything? It's not going to work. You could use the quadratic equation at this point, or we can complete the square, because this right here is really close to kind of the being part of a special product. So remember when we had things like this special product here, x minus 3 quantity squared. If we FOIL this, we've got x minus 3 times x minus 3, which is x squared minus 3x minus 3x plus 9. So we've got x squared minus 6x plus 9. So here again, you see that x squared minus 6x that we had from the beginning equation. The only difference is that we have in ours is we have a plus 9, or they have a minus 8. So this is kind of where we bring in the completing the square, which this problem, bear with me, because this is before we kind of really go through the steps. We know the steps of completing the square. We've worked through those in class. Bear with me on this one. It's really kind of cool. So, I'll make this smaller. Let's take our, we want to add that, we want to get a plus 9 there. We want our equation to be x squared minus 6x plus 9 equals something, so that we have x minus 3 squared equals some number over here, and we can square root both sides. That is our goal. That is what we're trying to get to. So let me get rid of some of this so I can write. Not the quickest method. Oh, I don't want it all to go. Alright, there we go. So let's look at our original equation, x squared minus 6x minus 8. Add the 8 to both sides. That gives us x squared minus 6x equals 8. Now, we knew, because we completed we know what we want it to be. We know we want it to be this x minus 3 quantity squared. And we know that that FOILs into, it expands into x squared minus 6x plus 9. So we know we need to add a 9 on both sides. By doing that, our left side is x squared minus 6x plus 9, and our right side is 17. Now, factor the left side, which again, we knew, we kind of went backwards this way. We knew we needed an x minus 3 there, and so we know that this is going to factor into x minus 3 quantity squared equals 17. Now we want to solve for x. So we're going to square root both sides. That's gone. So now we have x minus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 17. So go ahead, add 3 to both sides. Our answer is going to be x equals, make that smaller. Our answer is going to be x equals 3 plus or minus square root of 17. It doesn't matter the order that you put the 3 or the square root of 17 in, it doesn't matter as long as your signs are correct. And you would do 2 equations in this case. Square root of 17, we know 17's prime, so it's not going to, we can't break that down any further. So I would accept this as an answer. You could also say, like, write out the 2 equations. 3 plus radical 17 and x equals 3 minus radical 17. So now the next slide, let's go over the steps so that you have those straightforward steps each time for completing the square. All right, here are the steps for solving a quadratic by completing the square. I would write these steps down and refer to them at least until you are pro at completing the square. They are in your textbook. They're listed in your textbook on, let's see, page 233. I kind of tried to reword my steps to kind of make them a little bit more understandable than what the book has, but they're basically the same exact steps that the book has. Step 1, divide each side by a, the coefficient of x squared. If you've got that 3x squared plus 2x plus 5 equals 0, you want to divide everything by that 3 to get that 3 gone so that you don't have anything in front of that x squared. That is step 1. Step 2, move the constant c to the right side of the equation across the equal sign. So if it's like minus 5, you're adding 5. If it's plus 5, you're minusing 5. Solve equations, move that coefficient or that constant to the other side of the equation. Step 3, you're going to divide b by 2 and square it. So you're basically taking that, we talked about this, 1/2 b, or b over 2 squared. That is your important number. You're completing the squared number. This number is important because then you're going to add this number to both sides of your equal sign. Step 4, factor the left side in the equal sign so it's in that special product format. From the previous example, that special product format was x minus 3 squared. You want it to look like that when you factor. If it doesn't look like that, you factored it wrong. Step 5, take the square root of both sides to cancel out that quantity squared. So we know if we take the square root of x minus 3 squared, we know that that square root sign and that squared sign cancel out, and we're just left with x minus 3. Step 6, you're going to solve that resulting linear equation that you have. Like we did in the previous example there, we had x minus 3 equals plus or minus square root of 17. We solved that equation. The 2 equations, there's going to be 2 of them, so make sure you solve them both. 2 of them, because I forgot this in step 5, don't forget the plus or minus sign on the right side. When you take the square root on the left, you're good, but on the right, like for instance the example from the book, that x minus 3 over there, let's see the answer on the previous slide, sorry. It was plus or minus the square root of 17 is what it became. Don't forget that sign. All right, let's actually go through and work through an example. We did this one on the board, but I'm going to go over it again with you guys. We'll go over first example of completing the square. So it's example 3 in your textbook. We've got 2x squared plus 16x minus 9 equals 0. So step 1, divide each side by that coefficient by a. So divide everything by 2. So we've got x squared plus 8x minus 9/2 equals 0. Now, move the 9/2 over to the right side, so add 9/2 to both sides. That's gone. This gives us x squared plus 8x equals 9 over 2. Now we're going to do the complete the square part. So let's see, our b is 8, right? So remember we take 8 divided by 2 and square it. So 8 divided by 2 is 4. 4 squared gives us 16. So we are going to add 16 to both sides. So now on the left side, factor that. So you're looking for square root of 16, that's 4. 4 plus 4 gives you 8. So when you factor this, you're going to have x plus 4 quantity squared. Combine on the right side, so that's going to give me 41 over 2. So now we have an equation where we could just square root. So our next step, we want to square root both sides. And this leaves us with x plus 4 equals plus or minus the square root of 41 over 2. So minus 4 on both sides to give us that x equals plus or minus radical 41 over 2 minus 4, which again, our two solutions would be that x equals radical 41 over 2 minus 4, and x equals radical 41 over 2, negative radical 41 2 minus 4. Those are the more exact ways. You can go ahead and plug it in the calculator and give the decimal versions. So I believe it's going to be, it's like 0.5277 and negative 8.5277. So just read the directions. If it doesn't say, I would typically leave it kind of in this format unless it says something like round to 3 decimal places.